Over 4 years after a 25% tariff was imposed on electronics items it sells to the US, China still towers over other nations with about $178 billion of exports. But its electronics exports to the US have certainly taken a hit. It has come down by $29 billion in the last 4 years. This has offered a window of opportunity to its competitors, and countries such as Vietnam, Taiwan, and Malaysia, among others, have tried to make the most of it. But India, it seems, has failed to catch up to them. According to the Indian Cellular Electronic Association, or ICEA, India's electronics exports to the US in absolute terms went up by $3.2 billion in 4 years starting 2018, when the US imposed the duty on Chinese electronic goods. From $1.3 billion in 2018, it shot up to $4.5 billion in 2022, a jump of 350%. But was that enough? And how have other countries latched on to the opportunity? Vietnam experienced a surge in exports in absolute terms of $39.3 billion in the same period. The increase for Malaysia was $7.9 billion and for Mexico, $20.4 billion. In Taiwan's case, its electronic exports also went up by $30.5 billion in these 4 years.
All of these countries have strong export orientation economies. We're the exact opposite of that. We know how to attract people to do business in India. We do not yet know how to attract people to do business in India for export out of India. So there's a real mindset shift that needs to take place. It needs to take place in our whole industrial infrastructure. It needs to take place in our policy environment. It needs to take place in our logistics environment. And it needs to take place also in how we integrate with global supply chains and with trade pacts.
The ICEA says that while the increase in electronics exports to the US was 350%, it is insignificant in terms of absolute numbers when compared with these competing countries. So, why has India failed to grasp this golden opportunity?
We've never really had a serious electronics industry. We've struggled and tried for many, many decades. We tried during the era of serious import substitution in the 70s and 80s with no success whatsoever. And subsequently as well, we've seen other countries establish very strong export bases. If you look at the story of Malaysia and Vietnam, as a part of ASEAN, as a part of RCEP, they're very networked and very integrated with global supply chains, which is critical for electronic assembly.
If you look at the investment climate in these countries, at least at that point of time, it was better than India's. The policies were very, very clear and very easy for people to implement. So if a Samsung wanted to shift a whole supply chain or whatever part of their supply chain, it was almost no questions asked, come and start doing it out of Vietnam. Use Vietnamese land and Vietnamese labor and nothing else, almost nothing else was being used. And however, in India, we cannot do that. And I agree with the government there because we are a much larger market. So the period under review that you're talking about, 2018 to 22, was a period where I think we were in a transition. We did not have the supply chains before that to be able to do some of those goods that were required in the US. The last bit is about components. Of course, there our supply chains are still not strong enough to be counted as exporters.
Based on an analysis of the duties imposed on certain Chinese items, the ICEA has identified the key electronic products where India should take the lead, given its manufacturing and exporting capabilities. These include flat panel TVs, set-top boxes that have communication functions, wireless communication apparatus, and lamps with glass envelopes that are used mostly for cystoscopes and other surgical instruments. Besides focusing on specific electronic products, experts also believe India's electronic exports need more essential and systemic changes.
We're seeing the first signs of the growth of an electronics assembly and electronics manufacturing business, which are quite encouraging. The key thing that will determine whether or not this is successful in the long run is if a good backward integration local supply chain starts forming. So if the component manufacturer starts to develop also, that will start to breed a wider, more competitive ecosystem for electronic assembly in the long run. We will only be competitive if we can draw on the most competitive component manufacturers. But then we need to find ways of really getting those supply chains on a competitive basis, not on the basis of protection.
Our plug and play infrastructure is still not in place. So if somebody wants to come and set up, it still will take him a long time from land, building, or even if he goes into a leased factory, it's at least a 1 year stretch, and that's too long in our business. The second bit is where I think policy reforms are required, the changes are required, and that is in the area of components. So far, we have been able to crack the piece of assembly or manufacture in product lines where we have a protection tariff for domestic markets. So at the moment, exports is a secondary objective of most businesses in India. If we want to get the kind of numbers that these other countries got and exceed them, we have to make export our primary objective. And then, nobody wants to do EMS in India when all the components are still going to come from China. So let's get the components into India, which I hope this PLI 3.0 or something like that will come.
The central government, meanwhile, approved the Production-Linked Incentive Scheme 2.0 on May 17th for IT hardware with a budgetary outlay of 17,000 crore rupees. This scheme covers laptops, tablets, all-in-one PCs, servers, and ultra-small form factor devices. Minister for IT and Telecom, Ashwini Vaishnaw, said the scheme is expected to lead to incremental production of 3.35 trillion rupees, incremental investment of 2,430 crore rupees, and create incremental direct employment for 75,000 people during the scheme's period. The PLI 2.0 is a clear sign that the government is aware of the need for greater incentives in the sector, and experts believe that electronics exports are catching up. It grew a whopping 50% in FY23. However, they stress a serious rethinking is needed, especially when it comes to incentivizing the manufacturing of components in India. Most importantly, the sector needs a complete regulatory overhaul with a corporate mindset so that companies can prioritize export as a primary goal.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.